A fresh week, a fresh episode of Business Morning. Good morning. It's going to be about an hour of business talks, and it starts right now.
Yep.
You're welcome. I'm Ini John Mekwa.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Ladi Williams. First conversation today, 1.87 trillion naira, that's the amount Nigeria recorded as trade deficit in the second quarter of this year, as the country spent 6.95 trillion naira on imports, which is higher comparative to 5.08 trillion naira spent on exports. According to the latest report released by the National Bureau of Statistics, the total merchandise trade of 12.03 trillion naira recorded within the second quarter was higher by 23.28% against the previous quarter and 88.71% year on year.
Well, India was top among the major countries with major export trading partners. They accounted for 18.7% of the merchandise trade, while China was the number one import trading partner with a total of 29.91% of the transactions. Meanwhile, the report shows that crude oil, which accounts for 80.29% of total exports, rose sharply by 111.32% against the previous quarter to 4.07 trillion naira, while non-crude oil exports recorded 19.71% growth, or 1 trillion naira of total exports within the period. Well, we want to try to understand the implication of this figure, so they are not just numbers.
Exactly.
We have Mr. Mustafa Wahab, an analyst with Chapel Hill, to help us do that. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Wahab.
Good morning, Ini. Good morning, Ladi. It's good to be with you this morning.
Good morning.
Good to have you too. So 1.87 trillion naira deficit in the second quarter when economies are supposed to have been reopened. How do we explain this?
Mini, I like how passionate you are with the size of the deficit.
It's Nigeria. It's my country.
But honestly, I see your passion. Honestly, it's not as bad as it looks. I mean, at least when compared to the previous quarter, obviously last year. I think last year we had a deficit of over 3 trillion naira, and now we're down to 1.8 trillion. I mean, which obviously is an improvement. If you compare to Q1 2021, I think we're down by about 2% from roughly 2 trillion, right? And obviously, I mean, you've rightly mentioned it, crude oil, which still account for over 80% of Nigeria's, exports, is largely the key driver of this sort of improvement. So first of all, let's just basically break the number down, right? What we saw for Q2 21 was that export actually grew by over 100%, year on year. And imports, also grew by about 67%, but obviously that's a lot slower compared to compared to that of exports. And this is clearly, driven by crude oil. If you recall last year, I think we entered a pandemic period where, obviously the impact of which led to collapse in oil prices. And since then up until now, given what OPEC has done in the last 1 year, we've seen oil prices recovered. I think it's up by anywhere between, 45 to 50% on average, to around $69 per barrel, right? And the impact of this obviously supported, crude oil export and obviously, overall, value of exports. And if you check, production, I think production is down by about 2% compared to last year, but that sort of sharp increase in oil price was enough to neuter the impact, right? So, like I said, I mean, it's more or less an improvement from where we're coming from. And going forward, what we think is that, what we're seeing for OPEC at least is that they are now, starting to gradually raise, production benchmark, at least, for all the, members of the cartel, right? So the impact of this will probably continue to support, Nigeria's exports, compared to where we are currently. And so, I mean, our views in-house in Chapel is that we'll probably continue to see that sort of, trade deficit to continue to shrink, through the rest of the year.
Okay, Mustafa, let's look at other exports. Now, agricultural goods export was up 29.95%. Even raw material goods export recorded an increase of 49.98%. Is this just a base year effect or a true increase on the country's export?
Yeah, so I won't be particularly excited about, the numbers coming from Agric, And obviously, you've mentioned it clearly. It's more or less a case of base year. You remember last year, we were strictly on lockdown. I think Q2 2020 was even the heart of, the pandemic, especially in Nigeria. Nothing was coming in, nothing was going out. So the impact of this drove significant deceleration as far as export is concerned. So the numbers we are seeing coming out this quarter is more or less a base effect. But beyond that, obviously, you are all aware that, Naira has faced significant amount of pressure this year. So that sort of devaluation impact on the value of export too must have contributed to that, significant jump, across the key line item. So I would just, for me personally, I would wait for the CBN's number to come out, which is strictly, FX, or that is strictly reported in US dollars. I think that would more or less paint a better picture compared to what we're seeing now. So beyond the impact of base effect, that devaluation of the naira over the last 1 year must have also contributed to that significant expansion that we're seeing in the value of export across the key lines. So yes, I would wait for the dollar figure from the CBN before I read significant meaning into the numbers.
Okay, so we don't really have a lot to celebrate, even though we see a lot of increase. And another thing that worries me, like you said, I'm passionate about Nigeria. Like you noted, that 80% of our trade is still around oil. Even when we talk about agriculture, they are raw materials. We are not adding a lot of value. Are we making any progress in this talk about diversification, or is it just on paper?
Ini, let me give you some sort of comfort, right? So first off is that Dangote refinery is coming probably, by the end of 2022, right? And for all of the stories that we've been hearing about the refinery is that it is huge enough, about 650,000 barrels per day capacity. I think the refinery is huge enough to supply domestic markets and obviously export, the balance as well. So, right. So by the time we start to see that sort of, projects coming in, we can start to talk about how, export base in Nigeria will be diversified, essentially away from crude oil. But beyond that, if you think about companies like Dangote Cement, Boa Cement, one of the key focus right now for them is that they want to start to export clinker, into neighboring West African countries. You check the data of the trade data that we saw for Q2. What you see is that it is so disappointing that only about 10% of Nigeria's exports, goes to the whole of African countries, compared to close to 36% for Asia, about 35% for Europe. So, a lot still has to be done, when it comes to doing a lot of businesses with other West African countries. Hence the reason why, companies like Dangote Industry Groups, they are, taking the lead in leading this sort of initiative of pushing a lot of products, to other West African countries. Because, in-house in Chapuyo, we know that it is a lot cheaper for, countries like Ghana or Benin Republic or Niger to import clinker straight from Nigeria than what they will get from, Asian countries where they are currently importing. Because in Nigeria, we are sitting on gold, right? And the gold is basically, availability of clinker that can potentially supply domestic market and obviously export market. So going forward, in the next 2 to 3 years, some of the nice projects that is being done domestically would sort of, start to, show some sort of positive numbers or positive results in ensuring that this huge amount of deficit that we're seeing currently will probably continue to, shrink going forward.
We'll certainly look forward to that. Very 2 to 3 years, not a long time to wait. I can wait for 2 to 3 years.
I'll wait.
And hopefully we will see the result by then. Well, thank you so much, Mustafa Wahab, analyst with Chapel Hill Denham, for shedding light on the foreign trade statistics for the second quarter of 2021. So we'll move on now. And there's a report saying that 98% of Nigerians operating in the informal economy pay taxes daily. And yeah, this is opposed to the majority notion that a larger portion or population of Nigerians do not pay taxes.
So where's all that money going to?
How are they paying it? I think that's another question. So we'll have that conversation with Joachim Makebong, a senior analyst with SBM Intelligence. regions. But that will be after the break, so do stay with us and join us in this conversation.